Hey everyone, I hope you're well. This is the story about what if Naruto formed a Jinchuuriki Alliance. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well. So without any further ado, let's start the what if. 3 years later. 16-year-old Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze was facing his most dangerous enemy yet. Wiping away the dripping sweat from his brow, he sighed in exhaustion and raised his hand to the position where he would be able to land a final strike. He knew this enemy was worse than Madara, worse than Yugito, worse than Orochimaru. It was evil, pure evil, and didn't allow Naruto to even stop and think about his next move. Naruto hated it. The damn paperwork. Naruto tapped his fingers and lay down his pen on his desk as he sighed. He was seated on his office chair and was surrounded by paperwork. He smiled slightly and chuckled. Everything was on track. It was 3 years later, they hadn't been attacked yet by the Akatsuki. Throughout that time, they had planned, they had trained, they had cleaned up Uzumaki to the point that it was as good as new. I really didn't think being a Kage equivalent was just doing paperwork. He thought, irritated. Looking up, Naruto felt the chakra signature of someone familiar. Yagura peered around the door and laughed as he saw the pure agony on Naruto's face. He crossed his arms and leaned against the entrance and raised an eyebrow at Naruto. "Dancho, leave it to me." Perking up, Naruto smiled, "You sure?" He instantly stood up, asking just as a courtesy but was already pulling his jacket and straightening the buttons. Yagura rolled his eyes, "Yeah, I've been doing paperwork for years now, I'm used to it." He walked forwards and pat Naruto on the shoulder. "Talk to me, though, about the Kyuubi trade deal. They have managed to create some great earth chakra staffs that we should have." Naruto nodded and used 2 fingers to mock a small salute. "No problem, Daimyo-sama." He grinned and opened the window behind his desk. "See ya." Use the front door for once. Naruto walked down the street and watched as the wind blew through the trees all around him. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and noticed Killer Bee and Utakata talking. He ran up to them and bumped fists with the dark-skinned Jinchuriki. "Any news from Kyuubi?" Bee grinned, "Naruto Dancho. My bro said it's alright, but we should plan a day so that some jonin can come and teach how to use the staffs. Thank Kami that Yugito had beaten B enough that he used actual sentences occasionally, rather than rapping everything." Killer B was the ambassador from Kyuubi in Uzumaki, and was the one who trained Naruto during those years when he had to become stronger in order to actually be recognized as one of the strongest in the village. "It's official." Naruto thought and wiped away the sweat from his upper lip as he panted heavily. "B is definitely a demon slave driver. I know you're thinking of me as a demon, but look around here, it's just you getting beaten." Killer Bee pointed to Naruto and rapped while bobbing up and down. It had been a couple of months after retrieving Karen, Suigetsu, Jugo, and all of those children from Orochimaru's lab. Instantly after that, Yagura called Killer Bee to train Naruto in the ninja arts, while Yagura himself taught him the ways of being a village leader. Naruto was never good at reading or anything academic, but eventually he was able to take part in political and fake diplomatic debates against Yagura, for practice in case it would ever come up in the future. The only issue was that Killer Bee was crazy strong. Naruto wasn't weak, no, not at all, but he was still 13. Because of the fact that it would be a year or so until they go and live in Uzumaki, he needed to be the best version of himself he could possibly be. And he knew that daily training with B would get him there. Rolling his eyes, Naruto straightened his back and created more shadow clones to surround B. He thought of a great way to surprise him and perhaps get the upper hand in their training session. Naruto pointed to B and wagged his eyebrows. "Behind every good ninja, there's a weak heart. But with help from you and Yagura, my body is going to become killer art." Killer Bee paused and tears welled up in his eyes. You can rap." He stretched out his arms and came running towards his student for a hug. Naruto smiled and held his hands out. The moment that the dark-skinned man was 1 meter away from him, he had a shadow clone erupt from the ground and pull B's leg so that he was trapped. In a Shunshin flash, Naruto held a kunai next to B's throat and whispered in his ear. I guess that's checkmate, my win was just fate. He didn't expect B to still be crying from happiness when he turned his face around. He was still embedded in the ground, but boosted some chakra into his arms and pushed himself above ground. Naruto blinked as Killer B easily got out of the ground. That was your win, kid. B punched Naruto on the shoulder, who flinched from the strength but grinned. Naruto snapped out of the memory from 3 years ago and hummed in appreciation. Good work, he turned to face Utakata. Hunter Brigade, have any news? I was actually on my way to see you. Zetsu has been spotted around the outskirts of the village, but is unable to enter due to the chakra seals that you installed. He has been popping up a lot, it might be time to be on alert. Utakata stated, his blue yukata making him stand out against the green of the trees and grass. Nodding, Naruto smiled, no problem, thank you. The Hunter Brigade was the tracking and information team, led by Utakata, who were constantly out of the village to spy on any enemies and ensure that they wouldn't be hit with a surprise attack from anywhere. Haku and Kiba, who had joined Uzumaki alongside Ino, were also part of the Hunter Brigade. Team Alpha was the hard-hitting front-line squad which would, in case of an invasion or war, be one of the first on the scene. General Yugito Ni was in charge and trained with them weekly to ensure they were always ready for an attack. Alongside Yugito was Killer B, Suigetsu, Jugo, Deidara, Zabuza, Roshi and Han. Ghost was the Stealth and Assassination Corps, Uzumaki Anbu, in simpler terms. Itachi Uchiha was the captain and general of Ghost. Naruto had initially been wary to allow Itachi to lead them since he had left the Akatsuki and joined Uzumaki. However, Fu and Sasuke were also part of Ghost, and after Itachi had shown that he was capable enough to lead them, Naruto had no choice but to allow him, although he did ensure that Sasuke had eyes on him at all times. They all started following Naruto, who was walking towards the hospital. Any word from Gaara? Utakata questioned. Naruto greeted a small child who had run to him and held up a small flower for him. He bent down and took the flower and smiled, patting the small girl on the head and thanking her. Yes, he's Kazekage after all, so he's busy, but with the confirmed alliance and all, he might come to visit next week. He smirked, he said that he just wanted to check the village out but he obviously just misses us. Killer B burst into laughter while Utakata chuckled. When they had reached the hospital, they were greeted by Karen and Akane Uzumaki, who Naruto had met during the Chunin exams. They gave Naruto the paperwork for the various abnormal injuries some patients had received lately. This was important because if a Uzumaki ninja had injuries when they went on missions, Naruto had to assess whether or not the injuries may have been from the Akatsuki. If so, he had to find a way to minimize the chance of contact with them. Sakura was the head medic Nin, and Karen was her second in command, although she didn't let anyone bite her anymore unless it was during fights. Naruto rubbed his temples to calm himself down. It was clear that the Akatsuki were getting closer and closer. Utakata, send the Hunter Brigade out and search the eastern land, there shouldn't be many issues but just in case. The ex-Kiri ninja bowed his head, yes, Dancho. He shunshined away. Ah. Naruto-san, so much to do. He glanced at his watch and groaned. The main players in Uzumaki were required to go to a meeting once a week. This included all of the Jinchuriki who resided in the village, Itachi and Sasuke, both from Ghost, Team Alpha's Zabuza and Deidara, and Hunter Brigade's Haku. Ino and Sakura were also part of the meetings as Ino was head of interrogation and Sakura was head medic Nin. It wasn't long until all of them had reached the meeting room after their various duties and sat down in their seats. Naruto, naturally, was at the head of the table, with Yagura the closest to him and Yugito on the other side. B has informed me that the Earth Chakra staffs are good to go. I suggest the Kyuubi ninja to come and demonstrate their usage in 2 weeks. Naruto spoke, hands intertwined in front of him. Absolutely fine, Yagura noted it down. For the academy, I want to have a mandatory session where everyone is tested for talent in chakra control and medic abilities. Sakura leaned forward and quirked an eyebrow. What for? It would be good to hone the skills of medic needs from a young age, so once they graduate and become genin, they would already have the skills for basic healing. Yagura countered, causing Sakura to hum and nod. I have no problems with that. I can come in and test them. Shall we start it next month? Sakura questioned. Yagura smiled as his suggestion was praised. That would be perfect. I'll set the date and let the teachers know. Anything else? Itachi asked. Yugito clapped her hands together. What of the Akatsuki? Well, Naruto held up the assessment sheet from the hospital which Karen gave him. There have been an increasing number of abnormal injuries, presumably from the Akatsuki, as well as sightings of Zetsu around the sealed gates of the village. They cannot get in, but they can come close. Deidara shivered. Dancho, are you sure they can't break the seals? Yeah. Pursing his lips, Naruto put the paper down. I made the seals myself, and as far as I know, the Akatsuki doesn't have any seal masters. He glanced to Itachi who nodded in agreement. It's unbreakable for them. Only Jiraiya would be able to perhaps break them. Comforted, Deidara grinned and let Ino sigh and push his fringe away from his face. They had similar hairstyles, so when they met, they became instant friends. Alright, Naruto straightened his back and turned to Zabuza, onto the alliance with Kyuubi. There was a brief flash in front of the grand table. Haku and Kiba fell to the ground in a hunched-over bundle. Akamaru lay motionless next to them as Kiba rolled on the ground and clutched his belly in pain. There was blood leaking on the marble floor of the meeting room. Haku's eyes were unnaturally wide and rabid. He gasped and panted as he pulled Kiba on top of his lap. Crimson was dripping from his forehead. Medic! Medic! He screamed. Naruto fell to his knees and held Haku's face in his hands as he covered the boy in his chakra to calm him down. What happened? He asked in a soft and calm voice. Slick black hair was stuck to Haku's head as the mix of blood and sweat was unwilling to let it go. Haku cried and yelled until Sakura called Karen, who then both came running to Kiba to hoist him up onto the stretcher. Haku. Naruto spoke again. The feminine boy's eyes snapped to Naruto and tears welled up in his eyes. Haku, tell me what happened. There was a small moment of silence until Haku's bottom lip started shaking and more tears fell from his face. The Eastern Gate. Haku sobbed. Naruto's eyes widened when he realized that Utakata wasn't there with them. As the general of the Hunter Brigade, he should always be with his squad. The Akatsuki. Haku continued and held Naruto's hand against his cheek. The Akatsuki took Utakata. Naruto froze for a second and then let Zabuza pick up Haku and take him out of the room, presumably to the hospital to be treated. The Dancho of Uzashio stood up. He clenched his fist and grit his teeth. Dancho? He heard Sasuke ask behind him. Relaxing his fist, Naruto breathed out and in again as he heard one of his most trusted friends' voice. Naruto Dancho. Yagura's voice was low and monotone. What would you have us do? Naruto snapped his eyes open again and he turned around with a serious expression. Everyone was standing behind their chairs, back straight with their hands behind their backs, waiting for orders. He looked to Itachi. General Uchiha, you know the Akatsuki, you and Ghost go to the Eastern Gate and hold them back. He glanced at Fu, you stay here. But Dash. Naruto's eyes blazed. Fu. You stay here. They are after the Jinchuriki. Why would the first thing I do be to hand them over on a silver platter? Fu swallowed and nodded, lowering her head. The members of Ghost, Itachi, Sasuke, disappeared in a shunshin to find their other members, Kaoru, Akihiko and Haru, who were the team from Kiri in the Chunin exams all those years ago. Deidara, you use your bird and hover far enough where you can see them, but they can't get to you. After 5 minutes, report back. Deidara nodded and jumped out of the window, using his jutsu before he fell to the ground so he could jump on top. His old tacky outfit long gone, Deidara was now wearing a green vest with black trousers, a Uzashio symbol on the headband around his forehead. Ino. The said girl's head snapped up. Notify Kirigakure of a 50-50 chance of required assistance. They are the closest and can get here the quickest. Ino nodded and ran out of the room as fast as she could to complete Naruto's orders. Team Alpha, Naruto raised his arm. When Deidara reports back and tells us who exactly is invading, he paused. General Ni, B, Han, Roshi, Zabuza, Jugo, Suigetsu, he noted everyone. They all raised their heads and were ready for their leader's command. Naruto crossed his arms and looked at everyone in the eye. Prepare for attack. Well. Kisame grinned, his sharp shark-like teeth glistening as he tossed his giant sword, Samehada, over his shoulder. Itachi Uchiha, we were wondering where you had disappeared to. Standing next to his brother, Itachi stared blankly at his former partner. Apologies for worrying you, as you can see, it wouldn't have been a good idea to tell you where I was going. His smirk twitching slightly, Kisame answered. Pain would have loved to know that you were going directly to the center of the Jinchuriki base. He paused and huffed, no one was worried. Who are the brats? Sasori questioned. Itachi studied the scene in front of him. His enemies were his former Akatsuki teammates, Kisame, the sword-wielding tailless-tailed beast, Sasori of the Red Sand, Haiden the immortal zombie, and Zetsu. It wasn't looking great, but Itachi knew that he would be able to put at least one of them in a genjutsu. The only problem was that they knew that he would probably do exactly that. Itachi glanced around. He was standing next to Sasuke, Akihiko, Haru and Kaoru. He was confident in Sasuke's skills, as he trained him personally. The other three were ex-Kiri ninja with their own skills. Kaoru used genjutsu and razor-sharp playing cards, Akihiko mainly used poison, and Haru relied on ninjutsu and taijutsu. Oh, Haru and Kaoru were also dating, much to Akihiko's constant chagrin and exasperation, but he was used to it by now. Are we going to do this, or not? Akihiko grumbled, he was prepared for battle and didn't want to engage in useless pleasantries. Even though they were his general's previous teammates, they were enemies now, and that was all that mattered. Ha! Haiden grinned, this fucking kid knows what's up. He unsheathed his scythe and cackled. Sasuke rolled his eyes, impatient. Zetsu attempted to retreat into the ground, holding a large wooden puppet casing behind him, but Haru threw a kunai at his feet, startling him briefly. Kaoru smirked, let's dance. For the 5 minutes that everyone waited for Deidara to report back, Naruto stood with his arms crossed, his foot tapping restlessly. The second that the familiar shadow covered his body, Naruto looked up and watched as Deidara dispelled his bird, jumping down and landing gracefully on his feet. The older blonde wiped his brow and exhaled. Not great news, Dancho. By Itachi's descriptions, it looks like Kisame, Haiden, Sasori and Zetsu. Utakata is stuck in some sort of. He grimaced and waved his hands as he tried to explain, wooden puppet thing, yeah. Naruto nodded, did it seem like Ghost were able to handle them? The leader of Uzumaki had the utmost faith in his subordinates' strength. They were strong, all of them, and he couldn't deny that Itachi would have been able to handle at least 2 Akatsuki members on his own, maybe even 3. They'll be fine, yeah. Naruto turned to face the Jinchuriki in Team Alpha, he tapped his chin and then shook his head. I don't think it's yet necessary to send you all out. He grimaced, but if Ghost and the Akatsuki are evenly matched, how will we retrieve Utakata? Groaning, he rubbed the back of his head and shot a look towards Yagura, who was innocently smiling at him, leaving all the decisions up to Naruto. An idea appeared in Naruto's head suddenly. He spun around, there's a lake nearby the eastern gate, about 30 meters away from the battle. He met eyes with Suigetsu, who stiffened from the sudden sharp gaze. Suigetsu, do you think that you can conceal your presence long enough for you to grab Utakata and Shunshin out of there? Suigetsu felt his pale hair irritate his eyes, so he pushed it away as he thought for a few seconds. Yes. He nodded, I can. Suigetsu Hozuki tensed and clenched his fist at the thought of being so close to Kisame Hoshigaki. Samehada, Kisame's sword, had accepted Mangetsu, Suigetsu's brother, as a wielder before he died. Suigetsu wanted that sword, and he wanted to talk to Kisame and punch some sense into him, for personal reasons. Zabuza, Naruto noted, use your mist and silent killing technique to help Suigetsu get out of there, support Ghost if needed, you know Kisame, correct? Nodding silently, Zabuza hoisted his own sword across his back in preparation. Exhaling, Naruto counted to 10 and raised his hand to Suigetsu and Zabuza. Go. Oops. This image does not follow our content guidelines. To continue publishing, please remove it or upload a different image. Sasuke gasped for air as Sasori's poison started taking effect almost instantaneously. He pulled the long needle out from his leg and tossed it to the ground, hearing a satisfying clang as it hit the rock. Akihiko grimaced, I probably have the antidote somewhere in the village. The younger Uchiha grunted and straightened his leg, ignoring the burning pain shooting up his thigh. Enough fucking talking. Sasuke practically pounced out of the way and landed on all fours as Haiden cracked the ground in half with his weapon. He glanced at Itachi who was holding both Kisame and Zetsu in a genjutsu, but Zetsu was twitching slightly, meaning either Itachi's genjutsu wasn't strong enough, which wasn't possible, or... Oh, Sasuke motioned to Haru to attack Zetsu, he has two sides to him, the other one isn't completely shut down yet. I'll put the other side in another genjutsu. Kaoru pulled out a card and grinned, using that card to quickly cut off Haiden's wrist. Shit! I liked that hand. Haiden growled and spun around to grab the discarded hand on the ground. He was crazily agile, and that surprised Kaoru. Haru jumped in front of Kaoru to protect him while he cast his genjutsu. Haiden's scythe retracted and a long metal cable shot forwards. He deflected a swarm of shuriken and laughed as Haru frowned. Suiton, Kirigakure no Jutsu. Water style, hidden mist jutsu. Sasori paused at the sudden bellowing voice, and that pause was nearly his downfall as Akihiko shunshined behind him and managed to stab his kunai into Sasori's neck. He gasped in shock as the kunai simply sliced across, without any blood visible from the attack. He's wooden. Wooden? Sasuke repeated incredulously. Akihiko grit his teeth, Sasuke. Poison, fire. Due to practicing it numerous times, Sasuke held up the tiger seal and breathed out a large amount of fire, watching as it combined with Akihiko's poison shower and it burned away some of Sasori's body. Sasori fell limp and winced. Crap, he pulled his cloak away and saw that some parts of his wooden legs were scorched and burnt. A hand gripped Sasori's neck and he was limply held up by Zabuza. He chuckled lowly at Sasori's pathetic expression. Ha, I never liked puppets. He flung his sword at Haiden, who was behind him. Or Satanists. I'm a Jashinist, you bandage fucker. Suigetsu had appeared by now and grabbed Karasu, who was Sasori's puppet. Utakata was inside. Zabuza and Haru were dodging Haiden's scythe attacks. Sasuke was injured and Akihiko was trying to find some temporary relief for Sasori's poison. Itachi and Kaoru were holding Zetsu and Kisame in a genjutsu. Itachi! Suigetsu yelled, watching as the older Uchiha raised an eyebrow in question. You'd better get Kisame back. He used Shunshin to appear back at the village as quickly as he came. Snorting slightly, Itachi shrugged, I can do that. He shut his eyes for a brief second. Mangekyo Sharingan. Kisame instantly collapsed just before Itachi spun around and evaded Haiden's attack. Zetsu broke out of the genjutsu and sunk into the ground, taking Sasori with him. What happens if I decapitate you? Itachi pondered. Haiden stumbled as he ran forward, Zabuza used his sword and swiped at the air quickly. Seemingly, there was no result. But Haiden's head quickly slid off his body and dropped to the ground. Itachi tapped a pressure point on Haiden's shoulder and his body slammed to the ground. Hey! Itachi, you bastard! What the fuck did you do to my body? Haiden's head was staring upwards at Zabuza and Itachi, a massive awkward frown on his lips. Itachi smiled, "You won't need it for a while." "So?" Itachi blinked. So? Naruto intertwined his fingers together and furrowed his brows. "So that's the head of a Satanist?" Not expecting it to speak, Naruto jumped slightly as Haiden groaned, "I'm a fucking Jashinist, not a Satanist." Naruto shook his head in confusion, "What's the difference?" Grinning, Haiden explained. "Satanism is when you worship the devil, but Jashinism is worshipping a killing god, and he tells us to kill people so we can save them from the fear of death. It's a public service," he scowled, "and I'd love to sacrifice you to Jashin-sama, right now." Naruto raised his hands in surrender, "By all means Haiden, if you can," he smiled mockingly, "go ahead." "You fucking asshole." Haiden started to spit more curse words out of his mouth until the door swung open and Deidara came sauntering in. "Dancho, I finished the report," he froze. Leaning down and widening his eyes at the desk, the long-haired blonde man opened and closed his mouth multiple times. "What the?" Haiden rolled his eyes, "Oi, who's the bitch?" Deidara's face went bright red and he grabbed the decapitated head's silver hair and used a lot of force to hit it, "OW." Deidara slammed it back down on the desk. "Who are you calling a bitch, yeah?" Haiden cackled, "Obviously you. Come on, don't tell me you don't have a puss." "Shut the fuck up." Itachi smiled. "Ah, they're going to get along wonderfully." The Uzumaki seals were some of the most powerful fuinjutsu in the world. Karen and Naruto had trained under Jiraiya for a few months in the past after the rescue mission at Orochimaru's hideout. Currently, Suigetsu was standing with his arms crossed, fuming at Kisame Hoshigaki, who was seated with seals at every limb. Kisame had the decency to look sheepish, but Suigetsu didn't care about the excuses or reasoning that Kisame may give him. "Where were you?" Suigetsu spat. Averting his eyes, Kisame didn't respond. Suigetsu laughed and shook his head incredulously, "Mangetsu dies, and you just disappear?" He clenched his teeth and he felt his fingernails dig into his palms, hard enough to draw blood. "Senpai, wait, no, you don't even deserve to be called that anymore." Mangetsu Hozuki, Zabuza and Kisame all were part of the Swordsmen of the Mist. That meant that they were all pretty close. Zabuza and Kisame used to teach Suigetsu how to fight with a sword. Kisame even called Suigetsu the reincarnation of Zabuza because of his love of fighting and killing, but when things got tough, Kisame just disappeared. Suigetsu already had argued and gotten an apology from Zabuza. He was a headstrong guy who wanted answers. The younger man dropped his hands to his sides and stared blankly, his fury dissipating as his voice lowered. "You know that you're the reason I was kidnapped by Orochimaru and experimented on, right?" Kisame's head snapped up, eyes wide and jaw slack. "What?" He gripped the chair that he was strapped to. "Orochimaru did what?" Suigetsu exhaled and dropped onto the ground, shivering at the thought of his time being experimented on. "I tried to look for you, so I left the village." He covered his face with his hands, "Damn snake and white-haired freak got me." The amount of thoughts that rushed through Kisame's head started to overwhelm him. As Suigetsu explained and told him more about Orochimaru and the experiments, Kisame grew increasingly angry, as even though he wasn't the greatest of people, he would never allow experimentation on children, especially not kids that he knew. 3 years ago, that was when Orochimaru had just left the Akatsuki. That meant that Suigetsu was being experimented on while Orochimaru was still part of the group. Kisame could have rescued him. Kisame could have helped. He shook his head, it was too late now. He couldn't do anything about it now. All he could do was. Kisame looked up at Suigetsu. He sighed and beckoned the boy forward. "I'm chained up, so I can't do much." Kisame rolled his eyes. He awkwardly pat Suigetsu's hand and lowered his head. "Sorry." That was all Suigetsu wanted to hear. "I'm sorry." After Naruto had checked up on Utakata, he retreated back into his office and sat on his seat. It was a comfy chair, with 2 thin pillows under him so that he was able to fall asleep at any moment. It was a daily occurrence. He spun the chair around and stared outside of the large window. He saw the children in his village, the same ones he rescued from Orochimaru's hideout, coming out of the academy and walking with Karen and Jugo, who mainly took care of them. Those kids didn't have parents, so somehow the children took a liking to Karen and Jugo, which the latter boy didn't expect at all. Naruto sighed and leaned back in his chair. "What's wrong?" Naruto smiled at the familiar voice and turned around in the chair again. He looked up at Sasuke's expressionless face and saw a small twinkle of curiosity and worry in his eyes. Sasuke had also gone to the hospital and was treated by Sakura for the poison that Sasori injected into his body. It took a few hours, but he was now able to walk around easily and without wincing from pain. After years of being best friends, they had no reason to lie to each other. Should I have let Haiden and Kisame into the village? Naruto simply asked with his hands in his pockets. Sasuke was wearing his usual Anbu-style attire. It was the uniform for Ghost members. "It was your decision. I agree that putting them under strict supervision is necessary right now, but I think Kisame can definitely be turned to our side." He shrugged. "Haiden, I'm not so sure about." "Sasuke," Naruto started, "do you think what I'm doing is right?" Instantly, the young Uchiha raised an eyebrow pointedly at his leader. "Right for who? The orphans who you rescued from Orochimaru's lab?" "I didn't mean," Naruto interrupted. Sasuke placed his hands on Naruto's desk and leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "Or do you mean the Jinchuriki who didn't have a caring village and are now safe from harm?" Naruto bit his lip to stop himself from speaking. "Never second-guess yourself," Sasuke told him. "You're doing what you think is right, and that's all good people want from others." He straightened his back and exhaled. "You're an idiot." With his chin on his palm, Naruto tilted his head and smirked up at Sasuke. "You're nicer than people think, you know." "Shut up." Naruto chuckled. "Tsundere." "Shut up, Naruto." Naruto was sat at his desk, sifting through paperwork about Uzumaki academy. He knew he had to complete his work, and he would have loved to go about his day leisurely, but there was one thing stopping that from happening. "Oi." Naruto took a deep breath and then exhaled with a smile on his face, ignoring the voice. He. Biting the inside of his cheek, Naruto gently placed the booklet down. He turned his head and smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Yes, Haiden." The decapitated head of the immortal Akatsuki member, Haiden, was placed on a large copper plate. His eyes were slightly lidded since he was bored out of his mind, and he kept on contorting his face in various ways. "My fucking nose is itchy." Naruto blinked and clenched his hand in irritation. "Alright," he leaned forwards and started lightly scratching Haiden's pale nose. The other man sighed in relief and twitched his nose so that Naruto would get all of the angles. "Better?" "Ah, so much better, thanks fuckface." Naruto placed a hand under his chin and pursed his lips. "So, I've got a couple of questions about the Akatsuki." Haiden opened one eye and raised an eyebrow. This kind of thing had become the norm in Uzumaki. Kisame was now freely able to walk around without restraints, but Naruto made sure that if Suigetsu, Itachi, or Zabuza wasn't with him, at least one member of Ghost was keeping an eye on him at all times. In Haiden's case, he was able to go outside, but they refused to tell him where his body was. So, Naruto and Deidara had formed the habit of going on walks with Haiden's severed head. That sight shocked a lot of the children at the beginning. They didn't trust Haiden 100% yet, but he was being very forthcoming and honest about issues with the Akatsuki, so maybe he had just accepted his fate. "You all have said that Pain is the leader, but who is actually the one pulling the strings?" Naruto pressed. Haiden paused. "Pain is really fucking disillusioned. I'd kill him if I had the chance." Naruto raised an eyebrow, big word for such a small mind. He teased. "Shut your fucking trap, shorty." Hayden spat, annoyed that he couldn't even at least punch Naruto or something. From what Itachi said, Toby admitted that he was this Obito guy, and that he wants to rule the world or whatever. He rolled his eyes. I just joined so I could kill a shit ton of people. Naruto nodded, okay, wouldn't it be nice to kill Kakuzu? Hayden froze, and then a grin crossed his face. Huh, that's not a bad idea, twerp. Well, maybe you should promise to behave and we'll see about getting your body back. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly, then smirked, only if you promise to be loyal to Uzushio. Hayden narrowed his eyes, as long as I can kill a shit ton of people, I don't care about what side I'm on. Naruto's signature Cheshire grin crossed his face, and his cerulean eyes sparkled mischievously. Perfect. As he chuckled and turned away from Hayden, his chest tightened and a sharp jolt made him wince. A shiver ran down his spine and Naruto frowned, closing his eyes to rub his temple. He shrugged and shook his head to gather his bearings again. Did you feel that? Naruto nodded silently, greeting Kurama and then answering, yeah, what was that? I think something is seriously wrong, Kit. There was a quick series of footsteps coming closer and closer to the office. Naruto was prepared to greet whoever arrived with a scolding, because there was an etiquette when it came to having a meeting with him. However, he didn't get the chance to say anything because as soon as he opened his mouth, the door slammed open and Ino was standing in the doorway. Naruto Dancho. The said boy stood up and placed his hands down on the desk. He studied Ino's flushed and sweaty face. She was breathing heavily from running obviously. Only Ghost and Naruto himself were able to shunshin into the office, to prevent any enemies from entering. Ino, what's wrong? She shook her head fervently and pulled out a scroll from her pocket, tossing it to Naruto in a swift motion. Naruto caught it and quickly opened it, eyes growing wider and wider as he read every word. The Akatsukis invaded Suna. A whisper left his lips as he processed this new information in shock. Huh? Does it say who exactly? Hayden questioned, head facing the other way. Naruto skimmed the rest of the page and scrunched it up. He grit his teeth and growled, Pain, Konan and Kakuzu. He grabbed his cloak and threw it on. It will take a few hours to travel to Suna on foot, we need to get there ASAP. Send the Kiba and Haku there now, Utakata isn't fully healed yet. Ino nodded and used her mental link jutsu to send the information. I'm splitting up Team Alpha and Ghost. Yagura, Fu, Roshi, Jugo, Han, Akihiko, Haru and Kaoru stay here in case Uzushio gets attacked. The Akatsuki attacked Suna because Gaara is alone. When we are all together we are much stronger than them. I want to bring Kisame too. There was a low snicker from behind Naruto. He turned around and watched as Hayden smiled broadly, almost giddily. I think you're fucking missing something, twerp. Ah yes, Naruto tapped his chin and picked up Hayden's severed head, looking down at Hayden's smirk. Let's go get your body. Suna had a couple of alliances, of course, but Uzushio was the first to react and come to their aid. Once they had arrived, Naruto could only stare in shock at the pure devastation on the village. Buildings had been leveled, children were screaming and crying at their destroyed homes, parents were trying to find their families, and ninja were at a loss of what to do. Their leader had been taken from them. How would they be able to beat these three Akatsuki members, if the strongest in the village was beaten? Naruto lifted his right hand and extended his chakra threads in an attempt to locate Gaara, or three large chakra signatures. There are multiple bodies, but a few of them have the same chakra signature. Naruto muttered in confusion. Yes, that's Pain, he has control over multiple bodies. Itachi reported. Naruto rolled his eyes. Would have been nice to know that beforehand. Naruto. The said Uzumaki Namikaze snapped his head upwards and honed in on the voice. Gaara? I feel weak still in Suna. Where? Exactly where? Naruto continued trying to find his fellow Jinchuriki, but it seemed like the chakra signature was all fuzzy and diluted. When Gaara told him whereabouts he was, Naruto ordered for Itachi, Kisame, Hayden, Sasuke and Killer Bee to head to Gaara. Naruto would go with them, of course, but the rest of the people that came along had to help the Suna shinobi regroup. Haku and Kiba had returned and told them of the full situation. Deidara, report from the sky. He paused. Yugito, call for medics to start healing the injured. The Exiwa ninja nodded and created his usual white bird, acting as a lookout for everyone. Yugito, the general of Team Alpha, motioned for Haku to help her. As the ninja split up and traveled quickly towards where Gaara was, they saw less and less people in the area. Everyone had escaped, and only a few select Suna ninja were laying motionless on the ground. Some of them were twitching, but many were clearly dead. Naruto exhaled and shook his head, continuing towards the Akatsuki, ready for a fight. A shiver ran up Naruto's spine as he saw Gaara laying on the ground, with a tall orange-haired man with multiple metal piercings in his face. His eyes were a vivid purple. At a closer look, Naruto knew that it was the Rinnegan. The other bodies that Pain controlled were scattered around the village, definitely waiting in order to protect the main body from reinforcements. Hopefully, Naruto thought, Yugito, Zabuza, Suigetsu, Haku, Kiba and Deidara would be able to hold them off. Behind him was a pale woman with light lavender hair, and there was paper flying all around her and Pain. Kakuzu was behind them, eyes trailing to each Uzushio member. I was wondering why Haiden and Kisame hadn't returned. Pain's deep voice bellowed. He gave a small glance to Konan. Now we know. Haiden sneered, luckily, I never liked you or your god complex, fucking bastard. He then grinned, Kakuzu, wanna go around? Kakuzu chuckled arrogantly, Haiden, I knew one of these days, I'd kill you. He bent down, ready to jump. You have a large bounty on your head, and I'm going to collect it. In a flash, Haiden unsheathed his scythe and dashed forwards, his slash being countered with a simple shunshin. Naruto tore his eyes away from the two ex-partners fighting. He had to hand it to Haiden. The guy had absolutely no fear. Naruto Namikaze, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and Killer Bee, the Jinchuuriki of the Hachibi, you've walked right into my hands. Pain raised his hand and Konan was instantly prepared to attack, just as Kakuzu was. An array of paper shot out of Konan's sleeves and surrounded her, rejoining itself to create large wings. She looked almost like an angel, aside from her cold eyes staring down at them. Naruto frowned. Namikaze. Everyone usually knew him by the Uzumaki name, not the Namikaze name. You forgot my full title. He smirked, raising his own hand. It wasn't just Pain who had power. He's the leader of Uzushio, Bakayaro. Kanayaro. B laughed, throwing his 7 swords up and catching them, in his mouth, on his feet, in his hands, one of his signature moves. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, I'm better than a samurai, you can never beat me. Naruto sniggered and watched Itachi smiling slightly. His and Sasuke's knees were bent. My name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, the Dancho of Uzushio Gakure. He smirked, I have your members under my command because what I am doing is right. I am someone who will prevail. He tilted his head innocently, because you're the bad guy here. Kisame laughed and took out Samahata. His fear of Pain suddenly disappeared as Killer Bee made the situation lighter with his rapping, alongside Naruto's words which rang true. There was a small flash in Pain's eyes, and his hand lowered. I am fighting for justice and to make the world better. It's dirty. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Did he actually think that he was doing the right thing? You're wrong. He said simply. Jiraiya-sensei would be disappointed in you. Obviously, as Jiraiya had his information network, he knew that the leader of the Akatsuki, and Konan, used to be Jiraiya's students. He was planning to try and convince them that the battle wasn't worth it, in order to prevent any further damage, but if needed, they would fight. Konan's eyebrows rose slightly. You're Jiraiya's student. She shot a small look towards Pain, and an Uzumaki. The leader of Uzushio. You lie. Pain spat. Uzushio Gakure was destroyed, and has been for decades. Naruto shook his head. No, he smiled, I re-established it 3 years ago. He didn't know why Uzushio was so important in this conversation. Pain had paused and studied Naruto's face for a while. Until he turned, no matter, it will not change anything. With that, Naruto knew it might as well have been a lost cause. He raised his chin with a blank face. Formation Z. He gave his usual grin, let's dance. It soon became clear once 3 of his 6 paths of pain appeared, that he was the most difficult opponent that many of them had ever faced. Kisame and Itachi were aware of his abilities and continued to inform them during the fight. Killer Bee was able to keep up, but there was small droplets of sweat cascading from his face. Sasuke had activated his Sharingan and had stunted the animal path. Naruto held his hand out and combined his wind chakra with his natural ability to contain his chakra in a certain shape. His teammates were fighting to keep Konan and Pain occupied, while he paused for about 10 seconds. Futon, Raisin Shuriken. He noted that he should really thank and praise Jiraiya for his teaching skills. His chakra-shaped shuriken flew past Pain. Considering how his different paths were preoccupied, he wasn't expecting to not notice it. It cut his Deva path's cheek as he jumped to the side with wide eyes. Touching his cheek and looking down at the blood on his hand, he grit his teeth and ran straight at Naruto with rage in his eyes. Ah, shit! Naruto dodged the oncoming punch and bent down and attacked him with a roundhouse kick and quick fire attack from Sasuke. He heard a quiet grunt and backed away. Why is Yuzushio so important to you? Naruto shouted. The question was distracting him and he had to ask. Pain straightened his back and his Rinnegan bore into Naruto. He extended his hand and quickly raised it. Naruto yelped as he was brought into the air and then smashed down. His arm was shaking as he pushed himself up off the ground and glared. Why? He didn't expect the response. Because my true name is Naruto Uzumaki. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Well, damn. Naruto let out a laugh and walked forward, trying hard not to be thrown back down onto the ground as the Deva Path's gravitational abilities were fighting to make him fall to his knees. He groaned as he fell, but used his chakra-infused fist to stop the pressure on his shoulders. Why don't you just give up? Pain asked in monotone. The Shikaku Jinchuriki is ours. Naruto chuckled and lifted himself off the ground. He could only see Pain right in front of him and all of his attention was on his name. Because, he wailed as a steel rod tore through his skin and plastered him to the ground. Because, he used his other hand to grab it and pull it out, feeling his blood splattering and bone crunching. Just fall, boy. Naruto shook his head and jumped towards Pain with a Rasengan. Because we're family. Pain didn't move and the Rasengan was an inch from his face. His eyes were unnaturally wide, and his lips were parted. Naruto had stopped and relaxed his hand, dropping it to his side. Pain was staring at him in shock and Naruto wiped the blood from his whiskered cheek. He smirked and raised his hand in front of the orange-haired leader. Because we're family. Looking down at the extended hand, Pain's eyes trailed up at the honest and pure blue orb staring right into his soul. He shakily raised his hand, and Naruto clasped it. Whispering in awe, Pain replied. Family. It took a while, but Naruto convinced Nagato, who admitted that his Pain body was actually his friend, Yahiko, to release Gaara. He told him that the way Nagato wanted to bring peace to the shinobi world would only continue the vicious cycle of death, destruction, and war. Nagato was stubborn, but Naruto managed to make Konan see his point of view, and he knew that Nagato would listen to Konan. Gaara was released, and Nagato agreed to stop hunting the Jinchuriki. What about Obito? Nagato shook his head. I'm not sure where Tobi, or Obito, as you call him, is. He frowned. How dare he plan to take all of my hard work? Naruto awkwardly laughed. You didn't know about it? No. As they walked away from the destruction, Gaara glared daggers into Nagato's back. He was still in Yahiko's Deva Path Pain form, but didn't say anything. Well, what do you plan to do now? Naruto questioned curiously. He exchanged a look at Konan and hummed, I wish to continue ruling Amigakure alongside Konan. He looked at the ground, if I wish to visit Yuzushio. With his hands behind his head, Naruto grinned widely. You're welcome to visit any time you want. Nagata watched as the sun set over the sandy hills, and he let a small smile adorn his face, something which made Konan's eyes widen. She hadn't seen him smile for a long time. The man turned and bowed his head slightly to Naruto. Thank you, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Naruto blushed and bashfully waved his hand in dismissal. Don't be daft. He motioned to his fellow Uzushio ninja. We need to get Gaara healed, he beamed, then, come on guys, let's go home. A shadowy figure melted into the ground and reported back to his master. Every time. The cloaked man punched a tree, watching as it exploded and splintered everywhere. Every single time. I did not expect him to break up the Akatsuki and turn pain. Zetsu bowed his head, his darker side grunted, what do you want me to do next? Obito raised his head and narrowed his eyes. His body was shaking, practically vibrating from the pure, unadulterated anger flowing through his bloodstream. For now, keep watching them. Sasori and Kakuzu are still under my command. Zetsu nodded and sunk into the ground. It's always you, Minato-sensei. Obito chuckled lowly, shaking his head. You somehow always get in the way. He turned and smirked. The sun had set and the orange sky had turned dark blue. Obito watched as his surroundings blackened. He would destroy Naruto and tint the whole world in his own colors. I'm sorry, sensei, but I'm going to kill your son. Naruto chuckled pathetically out loud. How would Uzushio Gakure survive if they couldn't even locate Obito? The evil Uchiha had started attacking neighboring villages, threatening Uzushio to open their sealed doors, in order to prevent innocent civilians of other villages being killed. A plethora of lethal scenarios and negative outcomes flooded his empty mind, which so far he was filling with alcohol. Jiraiya had gotten him into drinking sake, and it had allowed him to relax and sit across from Yagura with a poker face. He didn't become aware of his tight grip on the glass until it tingled with the intention to shatter. He placed the glass down and leaned back in his chair. You're worried. Naruto raised his chin and pursed his lips, tapping the glass lightly. He raised his eyebrows. Is that so? Yagura leaned forward. Obito's attack on other villages proves that he's getting desperate. He cannot enter Uzushio, so he resorts to meaningless violence on others. Naruto picked up his glass again and sipped. That is true, however I'm not the sort to ignore other people dying because of me. He clenched the glass again. You forget that you don't shoulder the pressure alone, Naruto. Naruto relaxed his grip, though his fierce chokehold on his throat didn't. I don't want to be the reason for somebody else's pain. The leader softly spoke, exhaling. Yagura smiled calmly, so, what do we do? He smirked, Naruto Dansho. With a small laugh, Naruto placed his hands on the desk and pushed himself up. He remembered who he was again. Everything that made him, rushed into his brain, and suddenly he didn't feel empty and confused and worried. He had people with him, Sasuke, Sakura, Yagura, Haku, Kiba, Zabuza. Kami, he had the rest of the Jinchuriki, different members of the Akatsuki, his Uzumaki relatives like Karen, Nagato and Akane. He wasn't alone. Naruto grinned, you know, that signature Naruto grin which meant, don't worry, I'm Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, and I never give up. With an expectant stare from Yagura, Naruto told him the plan. We lure Obito into an ambush, Dadabayo. Sumi, the young fox who had gravitated towards Naruto a long time ago, had grown and was now the size of Akamaru. Kiba had helped Naruto to train her into a brilliant fighting partner. She sat next to Naruto with her tails whipping around lazily. Naruto pat her head and then stood up. Fuh! Naruto spun around and pointed. Have you mastered Komiai's wings and poison attacks? The green-haired girl grinned and held her hand up in a salute. Yes, Naradancho. Naruto cracked a smile at the nickname. Some things just don't change. I can fly for 2 straight hours now. He nodded appreciatively. Han. The older man turned to look at him. How is Kyumo's new armor on your body? Perfect, didn't take long to get used to. The Jinchuriki of Kokuo reported, flinching from surprise when Fu jumped onto his back and giggled. Ino, have you been in contact with Gaara? Naruto asked. The Yamanaka nodded. He will be ready. The Suna shinobi have been notified of Zetsu's abilities and will be used to fight the masses. Fu perked up. Jie-kun's coming? I haven't seen him in ages. She pouted. Naruto chuckled. That's because you were here when we went to Suna for the Akatsuki invasion. He paused. Speaking of the Akatsuki, I'll send a message to Nagato. As Naruto asked more questions about everyone's current states and abilities, he eventually realized that they were more than ready to face Obito. All they needed to do now was call Kyumo, Konoha and Kiri for backup. They had created alliances with these different villages, so it would be a waste to not use them. Thank you, tell them to be ready and await our call for the final battle. Naruto threw on his cloak. Now, we're heading to Suna. The plan was for all Jinchuriki to start traveling towards Suna. Suna wasn't as protected as Uzumaki, and Obito would assume that since there is still destruction from the invasion, that they are not as strong or prepared for battle. Naruto wanted Obito to think that all of the Jinchuriki were going to Suna to help with the rebuilding of the village. Suna was also near the middle of the other three villages, so would be easy to get to once sent the final call. Ino would go to Suna now, setting herself up in a room so that she could connect her mind to everyone else's, so that she could speak to Naruto and subsequently give orders to the other shinobi. Kakashi would also be in Suna before everyone else. Clapping his hands together, Naruto gathered the attention of all of his Uzumaki ninja. Team Alpha and the rest of the Jinchuriki will travel to Suna first. The rest of you will conceal your chakra signatures as much as you can and start moving an hour later. This will give enough time for Obito to be lured to Suna, but not notice the rest. He looked towards Yagura, who nodded. Yugito cleared her throat. Team Alpha shall prepare to leave now. Her commanding nature made the rest of her team start moving. Naruto smiled with his arms crossed. Team Alpha consisted of General Yugito Ni, Killer Bee, Zabuza, Han, Jugo, Suigetsu, Deidara and Roshi. I'll channel my chakra into Sumi, if necessary. I can replace her if you summon me, Gaki. That would be brilliant. Naruto hummed in agreement. After Naruto informed the academy teachers to ensure the children's safety, he as well walked out of the village gates, surrounded by the other Jinchuriki and Team Alpha. Naruto's anxiety was blasting through the roof, but with Fu's unabashedly confident beam, with Yugito's sly smile, with Han's nod. Oh Kami, even Killer Bee's short rap, halted quickly as Yugito slapped his head. Naruto knew that it would be absolutely fine. He was surrounded by strong and capable people. He had thought about all the different scenarios. Knowing Obito's ego, he was absolutely sure that he would be lured easily to Suna. Zetsu would be with him. Naruto and most of the other Uzumaki shinobi had chakra concealing seals on them anyway, courtesy of Naruto himself, but he dispelled a couple of them on Team Alpha just so that the lure could work. Naruto shook his head. He hated running. You can't use your Shunshin, otherwise Obito wouldn't be lured properly. I know, I just don't want to use all my energy. I always Shunshin nowadays anyway. Lazy ass. Says the one who sleeps in the seal every day. There's no alternative, irritating brat. Naruto just chuckled. Naruto slapped Gaara's back and watched as the Kazekage flinched from the sudden hit. Fu jumped onto his back and rubbed her cheek on his neck. A slow flush made its way to Gaara's cheeks as he cleared his throat. Nice to see you all. Gaara nodded. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Wow, you've been formal for too long again. He cheekily grinned. Guess we need to desensitize you again. He shrugged, internally laughing at the fear in Gaara's eyes. Fu hopped off and leaned forward. You ready? Allowing his leader-like aura to appear again, Gaara nodded, his red hair bobbing up and down with the motion. Ino-san is all set up, we are ready. Like clockwork, an ambush shunshined into the Kazekage's office and bowed. "Sir." "Report." It left Naruto in awe to see his so-called younger brother commanding an entire army and village, his lips upturned in a proud gaze. A masked man and an army of humanoid white men are 6 miles from the northern Suna Gate. The Anbu stated. Gaara nodded, "We will not be having the battle within Suna, but we will meet Obito outside the northern gate." He turned to Temari, "Finish evacuating the civilians and children to the safe houses. Mei, Kakashi, and A have arrived." Naruto walked beside Gaara as the leaders of their villages and watched as the Suna shinobi sharpened their kunai and katana, shoving exploding tags into their pockets. Trailing behind Naruto and Gaara were the rest of Yuzashiogakure's ranks. Ghost and Team Alpha were tossing each other scrolls and rubbing their shoulders in preparation. Kiri and Kyumo ninja had joined them. Instead of dark glares between the different villages, they had all been told that this day would change history. "Gaki," A greeted. Gaara and Naruto nodded to him. Behind it was a tall, fair-skinned woman with a stoic expression. Her curvaceous figure didn't leave much to the imagination. Naruto would find out that her name was Samui. Naruto would also come to know that the dark-skinned man with the katana strapped to his back was a man called Omoi. In front of Naruto now was Mei Terumi. Behind her was Ao, and Kirigakure ex-hunter ninja and Chojuro, the most recent member of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist. "Yagura had me promise to be loyal to you today." Mei Terumi smiled and bowed her head. "He didn't tell me you were so handsome." Raising an eyebrow, Naruto reached out and took her hand in his. Bowing his own head, he kissed her softly on the hand. "Yagura also neglected to inform me that you were so beautiful, Mizukage-sama." Mei blushed and cleared her throat as Naruto dropped her hand. "Naruto." The said man turned and laughed as he was greeted by a familiar lazy eye and greeting. Shaking hands, Naruto pat Kakashi Hatake on the shoulder. "I was told you'd be here, but I didn't know you were Hokage." He glanced up at the Kage cloak that Kakashi was wearing. "Ma. I'm just a temporary replacement until Tsunade-sama is fully trained." Kakashi recounted. 3 miles away. Gaara reported, 2 of his fingers above his right eye, a sign that he was using his Sandai. Yagura crossed his arms, trailing beside Naruto and the other Kage as an equal. He was the 4th Mizukage, after all. Just because he wasn't in power didn't mean that he was powerless. "Care to say a few words, Naruto Namikaze-san?" A stiffened as he said Naruto's surname. Minato was an enemy to Kyumo, after all. Naruto smirked. "Please, simply call me Dancho, I don't have a Kage title." Don't forget his Uzumaki surname. Konan and Nagato, using his own body, had arrived. "Who are you?" Kakashi questioned. Nagato strode forwards. "I am the leader of Amigakure, and the former leader of the Akatsuki." He smiled at Naruto, who was positively ecstatic that he was here. "Nagato Uzumaki." Kakashi's eyebrows shot upwards, obviously wondering if he could be trusted. Gaara lay a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "Only you can boost morale, Dancho." Testing, testing." A hesitant voice cautioned. "We can hear you, Ino, stand by." With Mei's happy nod, Naruto turned and looked down at all of the people he brought together. It was an unusually cold day. Even though Suna was a desert, the wind was icy and pierced through their skin as the sun beat down on their bodies. It was some strange juxtaposition which Naruto reminded himself to laugh at later. Standing on a podium, Naruto concentrated chakra in his throat and stood with his legs, shoulder-width apart. His long cloak was being manipulated and blown by the cold wind behind him. Gaara, Yagura, Mei Terumi, Kakashi Hatake, the 4th Raikage, were all standing proudly beside Naruto. "It's time." Kakashi spoke. Naruto looked down at all of his subordinates below him. There were some arguments and fights breaking out between all of the different ninja. For everyone to work together and fight alongside each other, something had to be done. There were so many differences between everyone, but one thing could bring them together. The need for peace. I stand before you as not just a leader, but as another shinobi who seeks peace in our world. He raised his hand and pointed to the sky. On the day that I found out that I was the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, I knew that something incredible was going to change within our shinobi ranks, and it has. Kakashi chuckled knowingly, as he had thought back to all the arguments that he and Naruto had when he was Team 7 Sensei. Who would have thought that Aim, Kyumo, Konoha, Kiri, Suna and Uzushio, 6 completely different villages, would come together with one simple goal in mind. The goal to have peace. Naruto grinned. I, too, was once full of hatred. Gaara started speaking with his deep voice. I was no different than the Akatsuki, whose ex-leader stands next to us today. He motioned to Nagato. They heard gasps from the crowd. But the Jinchuriki and people who care about me, changed me, and made me into the Kazekage that I am, right now. We may be from different villages, but the pain in our hearts as we watch destruction fall on our loved ones, is the same. Nagato stepped forward. It was something that no one was expecting to happen. I was the leader of the Akatsuki. He began. Silence befell everyone. I was consumed with pain and malice at the memory of my friends dying, and my home being destroyed. I wanted to bring peace onto the world. He shook his head, but I did it all wrong. The moment we use and understand each other's pain, our malice will disappear. Yagura nodded, recalling the time period where he was the leader of the Bloody Mist. We are all now just shinobi, we are all one, and we all want peace. Naruto shouted with his fist in the sky. The cheers and whoops of joy erupted from the shinobi below, as everyone started to clap each other on the back and smile together. But I'm too young, too weak and naive. So, I ask of you all today. Naruto raised his right fist and slammed it on his chest, bowing his head to every ninja around him. Tears started flowing from his eyes and sweat was dripping from his cheek. Please, give me your strength. Please believe in me. Below him, ninja from every village, Aim, Kiri, Kyumo, Konoha, Suna, Uzushio, they were all yelling and giving each other fist bumps. They all agreed wholeheartedly, and they would all give it their all. Sasuke smirked from the front lines and chuckled. Who would have thought? He really is worthy to be our Dancho. Sakura punched his shoulder lightly. Don't lie, we knew it ever since the Chunin exams. Yugito clutched Fu's shaking hand and smiled at her. Don't be scared. Fu looked up at her and through teary eyes, she shook her head. No Yugi-chan, I'm not scared, I'm happy. She laughed and wiped away her tears. I'm just really happy. Roshi pat her head. You frightened us for a moment, Fu-chan. We thought your usual optimism had disappeared. Hee, Fu giggled, that would never vanish. Right, B? Killer B threw them a peace sign. Isn't it obvious? We'll always win with a grin, cause Jinchuriki got that flow. Take Obito down, to the ground, with a punishing blow. Han raised his hand and rubbed his temples, sighing with a small exasperated smile. I'll protect you, Zabuza-sama. Haku stated, biting the inside of his cheek. Zabuza raised his covered brow, playfully shoving the younger boy's shoulder. Think about yourself for once, Gaki. Kisame laughed. Zabuza ain't gonna need any help, Haku-chan. Ha! Suigetsu rolled his eyes. Says the one who will be calling for mummy soon. Kisame growled playfully and tried to hit Suigetsu, who simply just dissolved into water to escape. Don't use up all of your energy, bastard. Karen cried in irritation. Jugo rubbed her back in comfort. Ah, Karen, relax. Behind Kisame, Haiden, Deidara and Itachi were preparing too. I'm so fucking excited. Haiden song, one hand gripping his scythe. Itachi. Are you gonna send a crow or something with me, Deidara asked, checking his clay pouch. Itachi blinked and before he could reply, Haiden cut in. Blondie wants Itachi to protect him. Haiden innocently pouted. Deidara slapped him. Fuck no. That's not what I meant, asshole. Pussy Day-chan wants Itachi. Shut the fuck up. It wasn't long before the three members of Ghost, Kaoru, Akihiko, and Haru appeared, reporting to Naruto that it was time for the Shinobi's Jinchuriki allied forces to head out. And so they did. Naruto watched as the large double gates were pushed open by Suna Kunoichi. The desert beyond the village felt and looked intimidating in all of its glory. Naruto thought that he would feel nervous, but the feeling was nowhere to be found. He threw a glance over his shoulder and shrugged as he realized it was because, literally, everybody had his back. Obito slowly became visible as they continued walking through the desert. He was surrounded by white Zetsus, Naruto now saw. Itachi had told him that black and white Zetsu could think separately, but he didn't think they could literally separate. Right behind Obito was Sasori and Kakuzu, who at first looked confident, but as the Shinobi allied forces continued to walk forward, they started to look uncomfortable. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Obito's voice boomed through the desert. Naruto raised his chin and stared directly at him. Obito. The enraged Uchiha started cackling. You think that this will do anything? Your pathetic attempt of bringing Shinobi together? He shook his head. Let me tell you, I killed Minato-sensei, I killed Madara, and now? He smirked, I'll kill you. Naruto stiffened and he clenched his hand. Don't let him get to you, you can't get Minato and Kushina back anyway. Perhaps Obito was stupid, but he revealed that Madara was dead. Naruto knew that now, the only enemy was right in front of them. No hidden tricks, no ambushes, no surprises. Obito, don't you see? Naruto chuckled, you wanted peace. The leader raised his hand and motioned to everyone behind him. Peace is right here. But I have to thank you, without you, this wouldn't be a reality. This angered Obito, and he cried with fury and shot forward with an attack. That concluded the pleasantries, the battle had begun. Obito had aimed for the Mizukage, who used her steam jutsu and made him dodge and walk into A's direction. Naruto concentrated chakra into his hand and blasted through 4 white Zetsu's chests with a Rasengan, watching as they collapsed. Omoi had sliced them with his katana, right next to him, and Naruto smirked as he watched Gaara raise his hands and use his Sand Coffin to crush multiple bodies. Futon, de Tapa. Wind technique, great breakthrough, Naruto declared and blew back about 10 Zetsus, guiding them with wind to land in the middle of Karen's chakra strings, which cut them to chunks. Ha! Haiden screamed with a massive, bloody grin and dashed headfirst at Kakuzu. Jashin-sama's gonna fucking love me. Naruto was then hit with Obito's vanishing technique and a chakra-induced punch to the right side of his stomach. He spat some blood out and growled, flying back in line next to Sasuke. He clutched his ribcage and let out a shallow laugh. It was ridiculous really. The whole thing, the whole situation, ridiculous and inevitable, yet it was something he'd failed to outrun. He'd taken part in the game of life's Russian roulette, with no chance of coming out unscathed. Life had aimed a gun at his chest and he couldn't dodge. He never realized that he wouldn't mind the hit. But in this fucked up metaphor for his life, no way would he bleed out. He didn't exactly know why he was laughing, there wasn't anything particularly funny about the situation. But as he stood next to all of these different people who believed in him, who trusted him, he knew that he was stronger with all of his precious people near him. Sasuke heard his laugh and also chuckled. Naruto threw a twinkling glance at his forever teammate and they both smirked. Sasuke lowered his head and caught his breath, he then stood up and gave a cheeky wink. Straightening his back, Naruto took a couple of steps forward and raised his hand. He shot a look to the left and to the right. Team Alpha were next to him, Ghost was to the left, and the Jinchuuriki were right behind him. Ah, Naruto thought, Obito really messed with the wrong bunch of people. They were nowhere near done yet. It was as if Naruto had tunnel vision for only one enemy, Obito. He knew that Haiden was probably having the time of his life and taking care of Kakuzu, and perhaps it was Gaara and the other Suna shinobi who were dodging and destroying the masses of puppets that Sasori controlled, so all he really needed to do was destroy Obito. That was easier said than done. The Zetsu clones were steadily being killed and dropping to the ground. Naruto motioned for the medic needs to close in on the ranks and take the injured members of the Shinobi allied forces back to the village. There wasn't a point in putting hurt ninja in harm's way. Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan was certainly coming in handy. Zetsus were freezing in their tracks and then pathetically collapsing and either lying there or disintegrating. Naruto didn't know how they worked or functioned, but he knew that when they were dead, they were dead. Obito snarled as he used his short teleportation jutsu to dodge different attacks from the Kage and Jinchuriki. It was one thing to know, yes, I'm going to be attacked by multiple Kage-level ninja, and the Jinchuriki that I have tried to collect, and it was another thing to know, okay, I'm being pushed back here. And he was being pushed back to the desert from whence he came. Clenching his teeth, he released a couple of fire jutsus, one where Roshi didn't see it coming and got his arm burnt. Yugito's sharp claws and Nagato with his 6 paths of pain out were ripping the Zetsus apart. Let out a gasp, he locked eyes with Killer Bee, his brother, and nodded with a smirk. They jumped back, away from Obito, and let Han and Yagura distract the evil Uchiha for a split second until they ran forward again, facing each other from opposite sides. They raised their respective dominant arms. There was a blue glow from A's body, and the orange-red bubbling of the bee-juice chakra coming from Killer Bee's. They seemed so perfectly in sync that Naruto actually felt jealous of their obvious bond. He grinned as he watched them shout out, "Right-un, double lariat." The scissor effect from both behind and in front of Obito made him gasp and raise his hand in order to use a jutsu to escape. The crack that the shinobi heard made it seem as if the deed was done, but Obito disappeared and reappeared right next to Killer Bee and slashed his right leg. Naruto noticed Obito wincing as he straightened his back, so obviously A and B had made some sort of effect, but Obito ran away to avoid most of the damage, the decapitation. Nearly. A grunted. Instead of responding, Killer Bee's right leg gave way and he collapsed onto his knee. Naruto's eyebrows shot up and he instantly set a Fuinjutsu trap to encapsulate him, effectively protecting him from any attacks. That also meant that he couldn't go anywhere for the time being. With Killer Bee out of the fight for the moment, Obito was dodging Fu's poison and Kisame's Samahata. It was obvious that he was getting tired. Naruto landed next to Kisame and shot him a glance. Samahata's eating his chakra, he has a lot left, but it's wearing him out. Kisame muttered. Naruto nodded and watched as now, Kakashi was engaged in a taijutsu, lightning and fire jutsu one-on-one with Obito. "I'll kill you." Obito screamed. The sound of his voice made the birds in the sky, who were already avoiding the battlegrounds, to screech and fly away completely. "You murdered Rin." Kakashi's Chidori caught him and he stood, motionless for a couple of seconds. "I did." He lowered his head, "But you don't know the full story. Why do you think I did it for no reason dash?" He spat out blood as a small kunai was lodged in between his ribs. Obito pushed it deeper. "I don't care," he coughed, "for your excuses." Naruto grit his teeth. "Idiot, dropping your guard like that." Obito and Kakashi were grabbing onto each other as Obito's Sharingan was making various shinobi swirl and disappear from existence. That ability had shocked everyone, but they knew that if they kept him busy, he wouldn't be able to do it. Naruto released his Fuinjutsu trap on Killer Bee. Now that Kakashi was pushing the Chidori further into Obito's shoulder, Naruto bit his thumb as Sumi, his little pet fox, who so brilliantly had been channeling Kyuubi's chakra and destroying Zetsus, had now appeared next to him with an expectant bow. Naruto threw his hand down and watched as black markings appeared on the sand, vanishing as soon as the grains had moved with the wind and motion from the battle. Kuchios no Jutsu. Summoning technique. There was a rumble in the air for a split second, until a ginormous amount of white smoke appeared all around the battlegrounds. Naruto stood proudly with his arms crossed and a smirk on his lips. "Hey, Kurama, want to take your revenge?" There was a low chuckle as the nine-tailed fox became visible for everyone to see. It wasn't a normal thing to witness. No, it definitely wasn't a normal thing to witness the Kyuubi in the real world, standing with his legs bent and ready to pounce. There were gasps and screams, but when they saw Naruto standing on his head, they knew that it was all in the plan. "Oh Kit, how I've dreamt of this day." Kurama shot forward with his tails whirling around and swiping at every and any Zetsu who was in his path. Naruto shut his eyes and drew his chakra to his hand. He was creating a Rasengan, which Jiraiya taught him all those years ago, but with the Kyuubi's chakra intertwined with it. A Raisin Shuriken wasn't flexible enough to use multiple times in this battle. He needed something that he could aim, change directions of, and hold. Kakashi had released Obito by this point and was holding the kunai, still lodged in his ribs, and pulled it out without a thought. The adrenaline was running in everyone's veins. Not many people could feel pain, as all they wanted to do was fight, fight, fight. It didn't matter if it was embarrassing or if they had gashes in their clothing, all they wanted to do was fight, fight, fight. Naruto watched as Obito's face morphed into one of horror, the sight before him finally making sense in his head. There was a gaping hole in his shoulder, where Kakashi had jammed the Chidori in, and Naruto knew that his Rasengan had to be aimed for the heart. He wasn't taking any chances. It would have been wonderful, truly wonderful, if Obito had shown signs of remorse. Perhaps he could have even joined Uzumaki. But it was clear as day that he didn't care about the pain he inflicted upon others, or the torture that others had to go through. Once someone's mind is set, it's difficult to change. Naruto leapt off Kyuubi and was boosted forward by Gaara's sand. A thin image of wings had adorned his back as Fu was pointing at him with a pained grimace. She was channeling Komiai's chakra into him, giving him the ability of flight for that split second as he flew towards Obito. Killer Bee hooped and Naruto noticed that he had pushed him forward with his arms, which had transformed into Gyuki's octopus tentacles, like a reverse lariat. Naruto felt his whiskers pulsating and darkening, his fangs elongating and his nails sharpening as he drew from Kyuubi's chakra. His vision became tinted with red as if he had blood in his eyes, but that was just his eyes changing and becoming more animalistic. Kyuubi roared and everyone fought to stay planted firmly on the sand, as they shielded their eyes from the sand swirling around them. He had everyone's abilities to back him up and push him further and faster, right into Obito. He swung his arm around and extended it out, yelling with fury at all of the monstrous things that Obito had done. He pushed his arm forward. He aimed for the chest. Silence. Sand swirled around them and finally settled onto the desert below their feet. There was silence on the battlefield as Naruto audibly panted for air. He stood with his arm outstretched, a warm and wet sensation wrapping his hand. He looked up. Obito didn't move. His head and arms fell limp as he was only held up by Naruto's arm through his chest. The Rasengan disappeared and blood splattered all around them. Obito's eyes lidded and blood dripped from his pasty, thin lips. His head was hung as if he was in shame. Naruto felt the weight of a grown man's body hanging from his arm and he retracted it. Pulling his arm out of Obito's chest, everyone watched as the Uchiha's body fell onto the sand. Crumpled and static, paralyzed and motionless. Blood fell from Naruto's fingers as he wiped the sweat from his brow, crimson staining his skin as his nails withdrew, and all traces of Kurama's obvious effect from his body had disappeared. He spluttered a chuckle and wheezed with a small smile, ashamed that he was looking at a dead body with happiness, but not giving a shit. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze turned around to face his troops and his fellow Kage. The smile on his face widened and he thrust his hand into the air. Cheers and gasps for joy had erupted from the shinobi. Naruto lowered his hand and took in the sight of Kiba leaping onto Haku and Utakata with a laugh, Sakura and Karen giggling and clapping as Sasuke ruffled their heads. Suigetsu rolled his eyes, but had a trace of a smile on his lips as Jugo shoved him slightly and teased him for being at tsundere. Gaara and Yagura approached him and motioned to Obito's body. "Well, Mr. Nine, what should we do?" Yagura questioned. Naruto didn't look down, tear apart his limbs, and then burn them separately. He sighed. He came back from the dead once, we can't let that happen again. He flicked his wrist and the blood left his hand. Mei swayed her hips and tooted in disapproval. "Let's get you cleaned up, Dancho." Naruto smirked and shook his head, I wouldn't want to get such a beautiful woman dirty. Anyway, he took off his black jacket, his long cloak was in the way so he threw it halfway through the battle. He put it onto her shoulders and leaned to whisper in her ear, "You should instead be more aware of your body, Mei-sama." She blushed as she realized that she had a gash on her chest, leaving some of her skin nearly exposed. She grabbed the jacket and squeaked, nodding in thanks and hitting the Raikage, for not telling her. He rubbed his head in pain and complained that he wasn't looking at her chest, so he didn't know. Conan covered the hole in Mei's clothing with paper and laughed weakly at Mei's furious blush, comforting her that it wasn't that bad. "She's fucking sexy," Haydn commented and nodded in appreciation, licking his lips. "True wifey material." Mei blinked and shyly smiled, slapping his arm as he cackled. Naruto pat Kurama's leg and made him disappear back into the seal. It would probably make him collapse if he was out for too long. He rubbed his shoulders absent-mindedly and sighed from fatigue. Naruto spun around at the familiar chakra signatures. Sakura and Sasuke were smiling at him. He bumped fists with Sasuke and hugged Sakura tightly. Her hair ticked his neck and Sasuke brushed the dust off his shoulders, protectively, like a mother hen. Sasuke smirked and shrugged. "So? Ramen?" He wagged his eyebrows suggestively. Naruto raised a brow and grinned, nodding fervently. "Ramen sounds great." Many years later, the final battle of the allied shinobi forces had created a sense of peace which resonated throughout the whole world. Even Uegakure, led by the stubborn old Tsukikage, Inoki, had followed in Kyumo, Konoha, Kiri, Aim, Suna and Yuzushio's footsteps. It didn't take long for Yuzushio to open up their doors for any wandering families or ninja who wanted to find a place to belong. The smaller villages had gotten in touch and now the whole of the ninja world had connections with each other. Trade, weaponry, academies were abundant and anyone who wanted to be strong could learn to become strong, for the sake of continuous peace. The person who instilled these ideas was none other than the Dancho of Yuzushio Gakure, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Speaking of, that young boy had grown into a young man and was sitting at the round table, which was reminiscent of the Jinchuriki table inside Hashirama Senju's statue. Instead, this table was in his office, in Yuzushio. "Ah, come on Inoki." Naruto waved his hand in jest and poured the old man a glass of sake. He now sat tall near the middle of the table and pushed the glass forward in front of him. Inoki huffed and crossed his arms. "Like I said, I never liked that Minato. But it can't be helped, you did," he frowned, "win the bet, after all." The Tsukikage rolled his eyes and took the glass, quickly shotting it. Naruto grinned happily and poured some for the rest of the Kage around the table. "This brat is too good at winning bets." Tsunade groaned and greedily downed 2 drinks. "So," Mei smiled and twirled a strand of hair around her finger, "I heard that you're stepping down, Inoki." The old man nodded. "My granddaughter, Kuratsuchi, is being trained right now." He boasted proudly, "That girl is going to be great, I just know." "Oh?" Naruto pushed a glass towards Gaara, who had a small smile and a ring around the 3rd finger on his left hand. "How's Fo?" The Kazekage sighed, still getting used to the temperature. She's used to different weather, it's quite amusing to watch her complain. He tapped the rim of the glass and grimaced at the thought of alcohol. "Still can't hold your liquor, eh?" The Raikage nudged with a mocking laugh, "No worries, you'll grow up soon." Gaara scowled and drank the contents of the glass in one gulp, slamming down the glass with a wince. He motioned to Naruto and the Uzumaki tossed him a bottle of water. He chugged it down quickly to get rid of the awful taste. "I'm a grown man." Naruto chuckled, "We don't see you having a wedding anytime soon, eh? Forever alone, huh?" The Raikage cleared his throat in embarrassment. Tsunade laughed loudly then froze when everyone stared at her with an expectant expression. "Jiraiya and I." A small smile played upon her lips as a blush covered her cheeks, "are doing well." Mei leaned back in her chair. "Look who's talking, Naruto-kun." She teased. Naruto pouted, "It's not that I don't want to, I'm just busy at the moment, plus the whole village is my family already." Nagato raised an eyebrow. Naruto, even Hayden has a girlfriend. He paused and shivered. Although him and Yugito aren't getting married anytime soon, only Yugito has the patience or strength to keep him in check. Naruto nodded fervently and sighed. I still can't believe it. Yugito just walked up to me and said, I'm with Hayden, I want your blessing. It was like I was a father giving away a child or something. The rest of the Kage laughed as he wiped a fake tear from his eye. What's Yagura doing these days? Mei asked. Naruto smiled and rested his chin on the palm of his hand. He still helps me run things, but that guy never knows when to stop. He's now the head teacher of the academy. Ha! Tsunade raised an eyebrow. The ex-Mizukage of the Bloody Mist, now teaching a bunch of brats? Never thought I'd see the day. Mei bristled slightly, so Tsunade waved her hand in apology. You know what I mean, I said X for a reason. Naruto pat Mei's shoulder and she calmed. I know, it's all so different now though. I nodded. I didn't think that I would ever sit beside the main Kage of every other village, or meet the leaders of some smaller villages, and he paused and shook his head. Is the big bad Raikage getting emotional? Gaara raised his brow and smirked slightly. Shut it, you're still a brat as far as I'm aware. A shot back without any real malice. Naruto agreed with though. It was pretty incredible how everything had changed within a few short years. He had been taught so much. Everyone he knew taught him something different. After the war, the Kage had vowed to ensure no village or town would ever be in poverty, or anything would ever harm the peace in the ninja world. Obito wanted peace, but he went about trying to gain that all wrong. Although he did teach Naruto that it was worth fighting for your beliefs till the end. He would always regret not being able to change the Uchiha's mind. They set up monthly meetings where they would all come together and discuss things that were important. Inoki was being replaced soon, but he was still full of energy, although he did have his eye on one of his students, Darui, if he were ever to retire. Nagato and Konan ruled over Amigakure with kindness and love. They had always been together, and that wouldn't change. Nagato and Konan taught Naruto that revenge and hatred only leads to more revenge and hatred, unless you will yourself to change. Mei and Tsunade were best friends, girl power, or something like that, Naruto had once heard them mention. Tsunade had taught him that the past doesn't need to define you. Gaara and Fu had gotten married, but everyone saw that coming. Fu had a crush on Gaara for what seemed like ages, until she randomly decided, yeah, I'll just tell him, and it turned out to be mutual. Gaara had taught him how painful loneliness can be, and how love can change someone. Fu had taught him that no matter what you go through, just smile. Hayden and Yugito were an unlikely couple, but everyone knew Yugito was the only one who would control the immortal Exakatsuki member. Ino and Deidara basically stuck to each other, but that wasn't romantic, they mainly just exchanged hair tips and gossiped about people. Although, Deidara had gotten close to Sasori, who had been released on probation recently, Naruto dreaded that though, they always seemed to argue and things started exploding and, it wasn't healthy for Naruto's heart or sanity, to be honest. Karen and Suigetsu were once having an argument, and Jugo, being very done with their shit, had pushed Suigetsu, who landed on Karen's lips. They lived happily ever after. Akihiko had been the best man at Kaoru and Haru's wedding, if it could even be called that. It was basically just a massive party where drunk ninja came together. Although, Naruto had a lot of fun, so no complaints there. Roshi and Han became teachers at the academy, where Yagura resided as head teacher. The kids loved them. As three people who never really had that much affection when they were young, they would kill anyone who looked to threaten the children, so Naruto decided that he didn't need to do much there. The children at the academy were a diverse group. Some of the kids from Orochimaru's experimentation lab were still there, and one kid actually grew a third arm randomly when trying to channel chakra into a kunai. But instead of retreating in fear, the other kids actually ooh and awed, which showed the older generation that fear and hatred is something that is taught by horrible parents, and differences were nothing to be afraid of. Families from anywhere and everywhere had joined Yuzashio-gakure, explaining that they had Kekkei Genkais and had been on the run for years. They were welcomed with open arms. Itachi and Sasuke had a serious conversation about reviving the Uchiha clan, but there were no plans yet. They had decided to do it the honest and sincere way, no harems. The thought of it made Itachi feel sick, and Sasuke just shook his head quickly when presented the option. They were strictly going to have one woman and that's it, although Itachi was always teased by Kisame for looking girly. Itachi had taught him that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for the greater good. Sasuke had taught him that revenge wasn't the answer. Friendship and trust was more important. Kisame, Suigetsu and Zabuza taught an optional class on sword wielding. It was really popular. They had taught him that no matter what happens in the past, you can disregard it and become a family again. Utakata still led the Hunter Brigade alongside Kiba and Haku, mainly tracking down criminals, and worked hand in hand with Ghost and Team Alpha, but there weren't many instances where they all had to get involved. Haku and Zabuza had taught him that there was no good or evil when you're protecting the ones you love. Killer Bee had monthly concerts. Yes, you read that correctly. He had gotten much better, and actually he had heard Akane Uzumaki sing once, and begged her to join his band. She did. Killer Bee had taught him that anyone can become happy with a little bit of music. Acting like a fool doesn't mean that you are a fool. Sasuke, Sakura and Naruto were always going to be Team 7, there was no doubt about that. Sakura was the head medic and trained others in the ways of medical ninjutsu. She had taught him to stop making excuses about weakness, and instead fight toward strength. Kurama would always be with him to give cheeky and sarcastic comments. He was his first friend, and would always be one of Naruto's most important friends. He was always more than just the nine-tailed fox, and Naruto regularly brought him out of the seal as a summon. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze had brought the Jinchuriki together and they protected each other to no end. The world was better with them not being afraid of owning who they are, and who were trapped inside of them. Things had changed so much. He smirked. Well, he was the leader of the Jinchuuriki Alliance, after all. I'm proud of you, Kit. With a smile, Naruto absent-mindedly glanced out of the window at his village. The civilians and the ninja were playing and talking to one another. Thanks for everything, Kurama. Yeah, he was happy. I love ya, brat. But there was one thing that Naruto had taught everyone. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze had taught everyone that no matter what happens in your life, never give up. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.